environment I was in. All of these things in my early childhood seemed to be anomalous until you started talking to certain insiders, at which point you realize this fits in with a greater mosaic. And it suggests that, like many others on Earth, I'm not suggesting that I'm unique here, there was extensive extraterrestrial contact that still to this day I have not been able to recover the memories from. Everyone in the UFO community is faced with a seemingly outrageous challenge to try to make sense out of the enormity of material that there is to study. How do you effectively navigate a course through an incredible body of material that encompasses many different ancient civilizations that have megalithic architecture or giant stones? How do you bring in the element of secret societies and the occult ceremonies that are taking place within these societies? What is the relationship between those secret societies and the governance of our modern world at the elite level? Is there a deep state? Is there some sort of supranational cult that is actually controlling the world? And then, how does this knowledge gel with the concept of a spontaneous quantum leap in human evolution that could be coming our way? A good starting point for this esoteric investigation is to rethink everything that we thought we knew about history.
My name is Michael Cremo. I'm a researcher in human origins and antiquity, and that has led me into other questions related to human origins, evidence that goes beyond the timelines that modern science now accepts. Some people use the term OOPArts. That means out-of-place artifacts. According to what most scientists now believe, humans existed in a very primitive state for many hundreds of thousands of years. Human ancestors like Australopithecus and Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and so on. They think, according to the standard ideas, that the first humans like us came into existence about 200,000 years ago. And they think the first civilized humans began to exist about 10,000 years ago. But if you look at some of these out-of-place artifacts, you can see some really amazing things. Some of them are pretty extreme.
We have this very interesting area in Africa, and this area is called Klerksdorp.
One of the more extreme examples were the Klerksdorp spheres. They're made of a naturally occurring type of iron ore called hematite.
And these spheres, in multiple cases, have a very clear structure of 3 lines that are all parallel to each other, inscribed directly along the equator of the sphere.
To me, that opens up the possibility that these metallic objects with these parallel grooves that go around the center of each one were made by someone with human-like intelligence. What's really interesting is they're found in mineral deposits in South Africa that are about 2 billion years old.
They are clearly artificial. They are clearly not a natural geological formation. They were carved by someone. This opens up another huge category of information, which is what has been referred to as the ancient builder race.
My name is Corey Good. I'm a secret space program whistleblower and an extraterrestrial contactee. Because of my access and clearance in the programs, I was able to learn a lot more than what is generally available about the history of our solar system. So during the time that I had this unprecedented access, I also started to look deeper into the history of our cosmos, and I started to find little bits and pieces about an ancient race they refer to as the ancient builder race. And they called them that because they knew nothing about them. They had found ancient structures all throughout our solar system and other solar systems that were around 2 billion years old.
This is also a distinctly fascinating correlation because for many years I have found connections between what the insiders are telling me about the secret space program and a unique body of material called the Law of One. The Law of One material claims to have been generated by extraterrestrials through a telepathic communication. I lived with the people who generated this for 2 years. Their group is called L&L Research. The source of the Law of One claims that it originated on the planet Venus when it was Earth-like. They are similar to us, as in third density or third dimensional, if you will. And they said that they date back 2.6 billion years ago. Now that is amazing, because we didn't know about the Klerksdorp spheres back in 1981 when this came through. And yet, the dating they gave in the Law of One for when they were third dimensional like us is exactly the same as the geological dating of the Klerksdorp spheres. And best of all, in the Law of One, they said they had a particular affinity for the pyramid shape, and they built it extensively. Therefore, it does appear that the solution to the mystery of who is the ancient builder race is that this is the group now identifying itself as Ra, the group that gave us the Law of One material, the same group that ultimately contacted Corey Goode, appearing as Blue Avians, now appearing in sixth density, billions of years later, after they were like us. They are apparently the most evolved extraterrestrial group that has ever been involved with humanity.
So one of the few things that we do know about this ancient builder race is that they had created this giant defensive grid around this local stellar neighborhood that we're a part of. 52 local stars clustered together. And they had created these giant Death Star types of ships that were the size of moons and planets that set up a grid around the entire local star cluster that prevented any types of intruders from coming in. And this grid was in place and kept our local stellar neighborhood safe from intruders for billions of years.
It does appear, based on some very understated things they say in the Law of One, that they had quite the vast civilization, that they spread out to many neighboring stars. This is the ancient builder race. They colonized all the neighboring stars in our solar system. Then you have to ask yourself, what could have survived for more than 2 billion years? Well, this is very fascinating because throughout our solar system, according to insiders, we have a cosmic junkyard. What is the junkyard? It is a collection of crystalline ruins. These ruins are made of a glass-like material, and the material is not actually glass. It is a transparent aluminum alloy. There have already been alloys of transparent aluminum made by various companies here on Earth. And when they stress test these alloys, they find out that they are 5 times stronger in their tensile strength than bulletproof glass. As our secret space program has apparently gone beyond our solar system with reverse-engineered technology similar to what they acquired in the Roswell crash over 70 years ago now, they found that all of the approximately 54 different stars in our own local group of stars, which are all gravitationally connected, every one of those stars has planets and moons and satellites with these same crystalline ruins on them. Obelisks, pyramids, and domes.
Fly by the comets, visit asteroids, visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, who put that there?
Those obelisks, pyramids, and domes only constitute what is visible on the surface. The ancient builder race spent a lot more energy building inside these moons and planets. We're talking about vast regions that are habitable, where all you really need to do is seal off the door to the outside and reintroduce air pressure. And now you have pressurized an environment that can be occupied by human beings.
What I believe is that in 1976, when Viking did this incredible reconnaissance in the bicentennial summer, they photographed something that was a mystery, was at the centerpiece of the NASA raison d'etre for going to Mars, the search for life, and they then never followed up. It's a set of pictures, two separate sets of frames at two different sun angles that show a collection of pyramids, an astounding geometric regularity in this layout. We don't have to prove they're artifacts. All we have to do is provide probable cause to suspect they could be, and then the ethics of science say you got to go and test.
When you go back to the original NASA imagery of the Martian surface from 1976, there are two frames that really matter. There's 35A76 and there's 70A13. When you compare what is on these two frames, you can clearly see a city of what obviously appear to be pyramids, which apparently again were emulations of the ancient builder race crystal pyramids that they had found throughout our solar system and beyond. There is a gigantic pyramid estimated to be 1.5 miles wide, and this pyramid is clearly pentagonal, 5-sided. But what is even more fascinating than that is that there are 2 of the 5 corners at the top of the pyramid that are narrower than the others. And when you actually look at the pyramid, it is the 5-star human pattern of the human body. You can superimpose the Vitruvian Man on top of what they call the D&M pyramid on Mars, and it precisely fits. Now, what does that mean? That means the 5-sided pyramid on Mars is anthropomorphic. It is a human image. It is a pyramid built in the image of the human body. So believe it or not, pyramids and obelisks have been found on the moon, on Mars, and on other moons and satellites throughout our solar system that are very damaged and very, very old, over 2 billion years old. This civilization that was on Mars was very aware of the ancient builder race, and that these ruins, as their civilization evolved, they discovered they were very extensive. They were always made of this transparent aluminum crystal, and there are many places you can go where you can go inside a moon and find enormous cities worth of space.
I'm Dr. Michael Sala. I'm the author of the Secret Space Program book series. I'm investigating ways to introduce information concerning classified technologies that have been suppressed from the general public for decades and are now going to be released, we think, in the very short future. Some of you might be asking, well, how could giant bases be built on the moon? Well, we know, according to a group of Japanese scientists that released a paper in 2017, that giant caverns have been discovered in the moon, and that one of these caverns is big enough to house the entire metropolitan region of Philadelphia within it.
The people who were involved in this ancient builder race seem to have mysteriously disappeared, and the cultures that came after them worshipped them as gods. They would emulate their architecture. The people who were on Mars, which we call the progenitor race, they actually built their own structures that were very similar to what they had found all throughout our solar system.
We had Tiamat, which they say is basically a supermassive Earth. And we had Maldek, which was Mars, much smaller than Earth, but it was behaving as a moon around Tiamat. 2 different civilizations had developed, and they were very similar. The beings on Tiamat, they all had these elongated skulls that we've seen in various studies, but they were slightly different. The beings on Tiamat were slightly taller and had different shaped skulls. The beings on Maldek were slightly skinnier and smaller, and again had slightly different skulls, but they were genetically related. They were considered basically cousins, and they had royal families from both sides that were in competition with each other and warred with one another. So at some point, this group that we call the Pre-Adamites they entered into warfare with another civilization that is in our local 52 star cluster. And they developed this plan to harness the ancient builder race grid and to use it as a weapon against their enemies. And this grid, it works through what we call the cosmic web. Every star, every planet is connected with an electromagnetic filament. And that's how portal travel works. We travel through these electromagnetic filaments.
And it's been used by some top scientists. So it is an idea which actually had currency in the last century, in the 19th century. And for those who care to go back into history and look at the major scientific journals of that period, you'll notice that articles on the electrical nature of comets and the possible electrical activity on the sun were topics of discussion. Unfortunately, in the early part of the 20th century, all of that was more or less suppressed. Something that, of course, we are brought up to believe, and that is that gravity is the controlling influence in the universe. It's what causes the planets to orbit around the sun, the moon around the earth, and to cause the tides upon the earth. All of that is true up to a point, but the thing to remember is that basically there is no understanding of gravity. Einstein's theory doesn't explain gravity. It has matter somehow affecting space in a way which is completely unphysical, in other words, warping empty space. There's no explanation as to how this might happen or what it even means. So we have more equations, but without any real meaning. What I'm suggesting is that we don't have an explanation for gravity, and until we do, we will not understand the limitations of that theory.
2017, on my website, I released 2 DIA reference documents that had never been released before. These documents were given to me by Washington, D.C. Beltway insiders, and they wanted me to release them on a certain date.
My name is Jordan Sather. I'm an internet influencer, speaker, and journalist. So the interesting thing about these particular DIA documents, these documents that were written for the ATIP program that the DoD conducted between 2007 and 2012, these DIA documents, we've never actually been able to read them in the public domain. What's really interesting is that at the end of 2017, Corey Goode had actually released 2 of these 38 DIA scientific papers to the public in full. And this has actually shocked many of the people who even wrote these scientific papers. Dr. Eric Davis, he confirmed that Corey Goode was the first person to leak some of these papers out into the public.
Corey Goode is unique because he's the first person that I know of that is both a contactee, someone who has had extensive contacts with extraterrestrial civilizations, while also being an insider of actually having worked in some of these compartmentalized programs. And what's even more significant about him is that he is trusted sufficiently by insiders to be given some of these documents, some of these defense intelligence reference documents, to basically release to the general public to get people up to speed with the possibility of these kinds of advanced technologies existing.
These DIA documents support the idea that wormhole travel is actually possible through the cosmic web. Using this same web is how the ancient builder race built this galactic protection grid around our local star cluster.
In this case, the pre-Adamites were trying to weaponize this natural system. And what they tried to do is use this feedback from this grid to cause the star of their enemies to go supernova and to then destroy the civilization. But they didn't time it right, the way that energy passes through this cosmic web, and they chose the exact wrong moment, and it caused our sun to super flare. And when it did, it destroyed Tiamat and ripped the atmosphere away from Mars, and it then also affected the atmosphere of Earth, and all of the other planets, their trajectories changed in this event.
The most important researcher supporting the exploded planet hypothesis is Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, and he was the head of the US Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. And he came up with this theory that between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, the present asteroid belt, there was once a super Earth, a very large planet that was in that orbital region. And he came up with a paper that actually explained how this planet existed at some point and how the asteroid belt is evidence of this planet's destruction through events that we could only speculate about. And Dr. Thomas Van Flandern supported this exploded planet hypothesis by studying the geology of Mars. And what he found was that half of Mars was basically 20 miles thicker than the other half. And that was evidence of it facing this exploding planet and receiving all the debris. And that this was also an explanation for why the atmosphere of Mars was suddenly evaporated hundreds of thousands of years ago.
And I heard about it in secret programs that did much more research than what Tom Van Flandern had access to. And the code name for this was Brilliant Pebbles. One of the fascinating things when I first met Corey Goode was that he knew what the code name Brilliant Pebbles meant without me having to tell him. I had already written it up. I already had recordings of people telling me this name.
So in the 1980s, scientists wanted to know what used to be where the asteroid belt is. They knew about Tiamat, but they didn't think there was enough debris there to actually corroborate that there was a planet there at one time. They developed this algorithm that traced back over time where these pieces would have been joined and would have been one piece, and where mathematically all of the other planets would have been. And they were able to extrapolate that, yes, there was a planet that was in that location, but most of it had been blown further out of the orbit. Interestingly enough, though, there was a project, Brilliant Pebbles, in 1987 by the beginnings of the secret space program, SDI, enacted by President Reagan, that had to do more with a missile shield. And often they would reuse within a certain set of programs, they will reuse a program name so that they have plausible deniability of higher, more secretive programs. They would layer them within the same name. And that way, if someone would mention Brilliant Pebbles, one of the scientists would be able to say, oh, no, that just had to do with a missile shield. It had nothing to do with anything extraterrestrial.
There's a CIA document that actually has the transcript of a remote viewing session where the remote viewer was asked to look at what happened to Mars just before a cataclysm that occurred up to 1 million years ago. And Joseph McMoneagle was the remote viewer who looked at Mars at the time of it undergoing some kind of planetary catastrophe, probably associated with the exploding superplanet. What he saw was that these surviving Martians getting on these spacecraft, on these planetary arcs, and evacuating to another planet which had a very equatorial region with volcanoes and so forth. This is where the Martians evacuated to.
So after the great destruction of Tiamat and Maldak was damaged beyond repairing itself, these pre-Adamites took the moon as a giant ship, a giant conveyance. It was also in the vicinity of Tiamat. They hijacked the moon and flew it to the Earth. And they tidal locked it with the Earth to keep it in place. And they lived on the moon for thousands of years, observing the culture, the development of civilization going on the planet below, and at the same time having certain colonies down where they knew where ancient builder race remnants were.
The survivors of the catastrophe who were inside Earth's moon then suffered another massive cataclysm 55,000 years ago, and we now know that this was caused by a solar flash, a massive emission of light, energy, and matter from the sun. Part of the problem when you have these solar flashes is that in addition to an enormous heating of the atmospheres and even the surfaces of planets, which could be up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. We're literally talking about a heat that can melt stone. You also have the sun throwing off a great deal of debris, a great deal of chunky, molten material that will physically strike the surface of planets and moons. This solar flash is what now is being called a micronova. A supernova is where a star completely explodes and nothing is left except for a red dwarf or a brown dwarf. Whereas the micronova causes an incredible flash to occur, but the star maintains its stability and structure in the aftermath. The latest NASA research that's only come out in the last year proves that there are multiple documented examples of micronovas everywhere we look. This is not uncommon. Stars do this naturally, and it is a very normal aspect of a given solar system.
So after these pre-Adamite groups from Tiamat and Maldek had moved to the moon, they were there for thousands of years. And as we know now, the solar system goes through a cycle of destruction. We had another solar event that wreaked havoc on the moon.
It would appear, based on historical records, that the people living inside the moon did not know that this solar flash was going to happen. It was being kept secret from them by their own governmental elite. I once had an insider who we call Bruce, who described that his faction of the military-industrial complex was only able to go inside these inner passageways in the moon a total of 6 times on covert missions that they sent people in through. And they found a vast amount of control systems where you walk into a room, the lights come on, you have these big giant screens that are very wide with displays on them. There are control surfaces in front of them, and it was gorgeous. And this goes on for miles and miles and miles, countlessly. Everywhere you look, there are these bodies that have not been cleaned up because the amount of square footage inside the moon is so vast and the amount of depth is so vast that huge regions inside the moon have never been cleaned up, never been explored, and there is a horrible stench from these decaying dead bodies.
And the remnants that survived that new catastrophe of pre-Adamites loaded up into their last 3 motherships from their home planets, and they flew those down to Earth. They were damaged, and it was more of a crash landing. Later on, when our secret space program located the remnants of these ships under the ice in Antarctica, they named them the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. So when these 3 motherships crash landed, the pre-Adamites that inhabited them began to cannibalize the technology and materials to build out a great civilization. And this civilization would later be known as Atlantis.
Another important historical reference to existence of advanced civilizations is Plato's description of Atlantis. He described an island continent with incredibly advanced technologies, with a wonderful canal system and concentric rings, that this was something that was built in a series of islands, and it was the center of a vast empire that existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And many people speculate as to where Atlantis is, but I believe Atlantis is probably the western portion of Antarctica, especially around the Palmer Peninsula, that this was, prior to 9700 BC, actually ice-free.
They landed in Antarctica, where there is apparently a pyramid that, if you could see it without the ice covering it, is much larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. That pyramid was a landmark for the surface feature of something that is predominantly underground. There are enormous ancient builder race ruins underneath the surface in Antarctica. The progenitors crash landed in Antarctica, but at the time, the Earth was on a different axial tilt, and Antarctica was not covered by ice.
In the 15th century, the Peri-Reis map was produced, and what it shows is the coastline of North and South America, Africa, as well as what appears to be Antarctica, the Palmer Peninsula, as well as part of New Schwabenland. Now, this was well before Antarctica was discovered. When we explore the idea of Antarctica being ice-free, we have to look at the evidence of pole ships. And the person who's most associated with theories of pole shifts is Charles Hapgood, who wrote a book called The Earth's Shifting Crust. And his book was supported by Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword to it, and basically believed that Hapgood was correct in terms of his theory, how the pole shifts approximately 40 degrees from one age to another age.
This pre-Adamite group, while their civilization was thriving on Tiamat and Maldek, they became very, very proficient geneticists. And they brought that with them to the Earth. And when they got to the Earth, they found inhabitants that were humanoid beings. They then started to play around with the genetics of these early humans and developed them into a number of different species, including hybrids with animals that they used as a slave force.
So the people who crash landed in what we now call Antarctica began to introduce their DNA into the genetic material of humans from Earth. And those people who were cloned out did have the elongated skull physiology. Apparently, there were two royal lineages that go all the way back to the source planets themselves, and they have slightly different features. When you look at the elongated skulls, some of them have a distinct bun-like bump that looks almost like there is a ball on the surface of their head there, whereas other elongated skulls have a smooth slope without that bun-like protrusion. This apparently refers to the two major types of extraterrestrial lineages from this exploded planet.
So the pre-Adamites thrived for thousands of years and became the Atlanteans. 11,800 years ago, our sun had another micronova, and this was one of the more severe micronovas. And as the ejecta from the micronova left the sun, it impacted the moon and also Earth.
According to the maps Charles Hapgood supplied and ice core samples, two British researchers, Rand Flem-Ath and his wife Rose Flem-Ath, wrote a book called Atlantis Under the Ice. What that book shows is that West Antarctica, the Palmer Peninsula in particular, was actually 40 degrees north of its present location in the temperate zone, and that approximately 9700 BC, this is when this coincides with what Plato described as the time Atlantis collapsed into the ocean, that this is when the pole shift occurred. And so that coincided with that region of Antarctica moving down towards the South Pole and it being frozen over, and everything that was in that continent was flooded and flash frozen. And so according to the maps and the ice core samples, what we can see about Antarctica is that indeed West Antarctica has been ice-free for significant periods because the ice core samples only go back several thousand years at most. Whereas when we look at the ice core samples from East Antarctica, these are millions of years old.
When the Earth shifted on its axis, it caused Antarctica to move from a lush tropical zone to a colder region. And it did so quickly that it flash froze the waves that were leaping over the continent.
Several years ago, the CIA declassified a document that was authored by a geologist by the name of Chan Thomas. That document is called the Adam and Eve Story, and it describes a cataclysmic series of events associated with a pole shift of up to 90 degrees, where the Antarctic and the Arctic, those both flip approximately 90 degrees so that they are now at the equatorial zones of the planet.
With a rumble so low as to be inaudible, growing and fuming into a thunderous roar, the earthquake starts. Only it's not like any earthquake in recorded history. In California, the mountains shake like ferns in a breeze. The mighty Pacific rears back and piles up into a mountain of water 2 miles high and starts its race eastward. With a force of 1,000 armies, the wind attacks. Within 3 hours, the fantastic wall of water moves across the continent, burying the wind-ravaged land under 2 miles of seething water coast to coast. Central America suffers the same cannonade. South America finds the Andes not high enough to stop the cataclysmic violence pounded out by water in her berserk rage. In less than a day, Ecuador, Peru, Western Brazil are shaken madly by the devastating earthquake, burned by Mother Earth fire, buried under cubic miles of torrential Pacific seas, and then turned into a frozen hell. Everything freezes. Man, beast, plant, and mud are all rock hard in less than 4 hours. Europe cannot escape the onslaught. Western Africa and the sands of the Sahara vanish in nature's wrath. The area bounded by the Congo, South Africa, and Kenya suffers only severe earthquakes and wind. Survivors there marvel at the sun standing still in the sky for nearly half a day. As the Arctic basin leaves its polar home, eastern Siberia, Manchuria, China, and Burma are subjected to the same annihilation as South America. Wind, earth fire, inundation, and freezing. The Bay of Bengal Basin, just east of India, is now at the North Pole. The Pacific Ocean, just west of Peru, is at the South Pole. Australia is the new unexplored continent in the world's temperate zone, with only a few handfuls of survivors populating its vastness. The cataclysm has done its work well and drives the pitiful few who survive into a new stone age. Once more, the Earth has shifted its shelf, with the poles moving almost to the equator in a fraction of a day. Again, the atmosphere and oceans, refusing to change direction with the Earth's shell, have wiped out almost all life. After this tumble, we'll join Noah, Adam and Eve, Atlantis, Mu, and Olympus.
When we look at ice core samples, it doesn't support a pole shift occurring to that extent, not 90 degrees, but certainly 40 degrees or less. That's what the ice core samples support. These cataclysms would result in large loss of life throughout the planet, and that there would be portions of the planet, however, that would escape the worst of these winds and of these tsunamis, and those would be the survivors that would build civilization again from the ashes of that great catastrophe.
Thanks to the insider testimony of Corey Goode, we have now discovered that the people with the elongated skulls are survivors of a catastrophe that took place in our solar system. And what I find uniquely fascinating is that once they crash landed on Earth 55,000 years ago, they quickly made a treaty with each other. Even though they were at war, they decided to coexist on the Earth. One lineage said, "We will take what we would now call Africa and Europe." The other lineage said, "We will take South America, North America, and the eastern half of Asia." Now, what I find particularly intriguing is that when you look at the pyramid architecture that occurred in the aftermath of this treaty, there are slight variations. Each of these original lineages had unique styles to their pyramids. Let's talk about the pyramids that you see in Egypt and throughout Africa, and how those pyramids have smooth walls going up that are very distinctly not terraced. Then, when we go to Mesoamerica, we notice that there are distinct differences in the architectural style, where now you have step pyramids, which almost consistently show different courses.
Officially, they've been programming us that pyramids are built in Egypt and Central America. And that's wrong, because the pyramids have been built on all 6 continents. Probably at this moment in time, there is no living soul who have visited and investigated more pyramids than myself. In China, 250 pyramids near the city of Xi'an. We have pyramids in Indonesia. Our friend, Dr. Danny Hillman, discovered pyramid in western part of the island of Java. It is known under the name Gunung Padang, the Hill of Light. Cambodia Southeastern Asia, the Koh Ker in the northeastern part of the country, a beautiful pyramid. Australia, 2 hours drive from Brisbane to the north, Gympie Pyramid. In Africa, 155 pyramids. The island of Mauritius, 4,000 kilometers away from the African continent, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, 7 beautiful stepped pyramids. More than 300 pyramids in Peru. And then Tucumã pyramids in the northern part, more than 200 of them. The biggest one, of course, Huaca del Sol, the Pyramid of the Sun, near the town of Trujillo. There are probably well over 100,000 pyramids, maybe up to 500,000. But more than 97% are still hidden in the jungles and forests.
At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, we have a very unique outlay of different pyramidal type sites. And according to the work of Graham Hancock, those different architectural sites, although they appear to be randomly positioned, actually align with the constellation known as Draco. And what's best of all is that there is a drift in the Earth's axis called the precession of the equinoxes. And the alignment of where this series of pyramids in the Angkor Wat area of Cambodia line up with the position of the Draco constellation, this only works if you go back 12,500 years ago. And this is precisely the same as the alignment that everyone is familiar with the pyramids of Giza and the stars in the belt of the constellation of Orion. Another thing that is very fascinating about Angkor Wat is that when you look at some of the temples within this area, and there is one, for example, called Bakse Chamkrong. Oh my God, it looks exactly like the step pyramids in Mesoamerica. As you look at this overlay, notice the perfection of how these two different pyramids fit together. This is not a different society. This is a unified culture. But wait a minute. We've got Mesoamerica and we've got Cambodia. They're separated by the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, and yet they're using exactly the same architecture. The elongated skull physiology has been found all over the planet. We see it in Boskop, South Africa. We see the same type of remains being dug up in a dig in Siberia in a town called Omsk. We also saw reports that the Mongolians or the Huns, as they conquered going west, had these strange elongated skull features as well. We see these skulls in the tombs of the elite in Europe. And then, interestingly enough, you have a different strain that we find in the Americas, both north and south. I find it very fascinating that this evidence is hidden out in the open. We see these elongated skulls all over the world, but we don't ask the deeper questions. This becomes a very important question of how the modern-day Illuminati, deep state, or cabal actually do believe that they are the remnant of these people with the elongated skulls.
The deep state consists of the Rothschilds, the British royal family, the Vatican, and the Chabad cult, which many Jews do not consider to be Jewish. They consider it to be a Khazarian criminal organization. The secret societies are higher than the countries in terms of the loyalties of their membership. Whether it began with with stellar civilizations, I've met someone who purports to be from a stellar civilization, and I've been informed they don't like the term extraterrestrial. They prefer stellar civilization. Be that as it may, whether you believe in extraterrestrial stuff or not, it's clear that here on Earth there's a 1%, there's a 99%. And in 2012, the forces of good started to win. And the Mayans and others had predicted this. And I think the way I explain it to myself is that the collective meditation and prayer that was being done ended up bringing in the positive stellar civilizations. And now the negative stellar civilizations are on the run, and the elites are on the run. Now, the good news is I think human beings are an experiment in free will. And I believe that if we can resurrect our individual sovereignty, there is no power in the galaxy that can stand up to us.
As I got older, there was another series of high strangeness events that took place. I was often having high fevers as I grew up. And these fevers were correlated with two distinct phenomena that would always happen. The first thing is that I would have a very strong sense of pressure in my ears, and I would start yelling to try to get over the sound. The other thing that would happen is I would get geometry in these hallucinations during the fevers. I would feel as if the world around me had been turned into geometry. I would see strange geometric patterns like mandalas superimposed over everything. This was not at all enjoyable. It was very unpleasant. I would be screaming, and my mother would have to calm me down. As I got older, I discovered that those fevers were most likely an extraterrestrial phenomena in nature, that there was something going on. The way these extraterrestrials on the benevolent side change our DNA is through a virus. Now remember, what does a virus do? It defeats the cell wall and injects its own DNA into your cell. You can take a cell that defines who you are with its DNA and inject new code into it with a virus. I remember having dreams where I was seeing benevolent, ordinary, human-looking people like the old man in robes coming into my space, landing in this roughly bus-shaped craft in my yard, bringing me on board, and actually giving me these injections of these viruses so that my DNA could be modified and upgraded. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I would be on some sort of program that I didn't consciously have any objection to, where I felt like it was time to go to school. I would walk out the side door like it was time to go to school, but I would notice that everything was black, and I'd say, what the heck is going on? I'd turn around and go back into the house. Now, this appears again to be in the high strangeness category, but it seems that at that moment where I'm standing there with my backpack looking at the darkness of the night, that I'm being spliced back in, and I would lose the memory from the time that I was standing there to the time that I would return to the exact same location. This is actually a very common thing that you read about in the contactee literature regarding these extraterrestrial contact experiences. Now, it would seem in these experiences that I was being brought on board some sort of extraterrestrial craft. There was some sort of training taking place, and these classes actually could take place for potentially weeks of time, and then I would be spliced right back in till the moment I left. It does appear that there is a whole section of my life that I have no conscious access to at this time. And certain insiders have told me that because of my unique family background, where the Wilcock line is an English aristocratic bloodline from Yorkshire, that I apparently do already have some of this extraterrestrial DNA.
Right now, millions of people on this planet are already in contact with extraterrestrials and they don't even realize it. These beings are contacting us through our dreams and through our subconscious, and many of the thoughts and ideas that we are coming up with don't originate from us. The purpose of contacting people through their dreams and subconscious is to acclimate them and prepare them for open face-to-face contact.
I'm James Gillen, and we're here at ECETI Ranch. Well, ECETI stands for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Yeah, the beginning of ECETI came in visions. And I kept seeing visions of this massive mountain. And when I first came on the property, it was just unbelievable. It was like a movie out of the Old Testament or something. The mountain the clouds started changing. There's a giant lenticular cloud. It was lit up orange underneath. I got such a download. I was getting tears. I was just standing there looking at the mountain crying. And I go, this is it. This is the vision. I was focused on creating a healing center, like a retreat center. And I wanted to just make it totally eclectic. I didn't want to pigeonhole it or keep it with any one group. And about probably halfway through of building this center, they started showing up. The ships started showing up.
It's got a double. It's weird. Whoa, thank you. That is unbelievably bright. Whoa, look at that. Woo-hoo, whoa.
And the first encounter was an all-day meditation. I was meditating, and I had a beautiful transmission coming to him about the earth and humanity and our ancient history, who we are, and how we've gotten to where we are, and what needs to happen to heal, to clean up the planet and the consciousness here. And so I asked them, where are you coming from? And they said, actually, we're on a ship. And I didn't even make it to the door, and my sister and her friends came up banging on the door, and they go, did you see it? Did you see it? And I said, see what? There was a huge light ship hovering right over the house here. So that was my first encounter where I realized I needed to start doing some research on tying in the higher dimensional beings and the spiritually and technologically advanced off-world visitors into the spirituality side of things. When you go within and start expanding in consciousness, we find out we're not just a body and a personality, we're spirit and a soul, and that's a multidimensional aspect of ourselves. And so as you expand in awareness, you start taking in these other dimensions, and contact is a natural occurrence when that happens.
My name is Barry Littleton. I do stock trading, level 2 options, and I also am involved in social services. In the UFO field, I'm kind of just stepping forward. It started off with childhood experiences, so that's one of the things, but then I went into what I call adult onset experiences, which included missing time. So we're looking almost 20 hours of my life was missing behind being up on board these ships. When I talk about it now, it sounds very uniform, but it took a lifetime to put the pieces together. Instead, I was more into hiding it to a degree and trying to just be normal and whatever it took to kind of try to blend in instead of talk about these experiences, anything like what I'm doing now. I always heard it as termed as demonic in dealing with demons, and that labels somebody as demons and crazy and puts the most negative connotation on it possible. So that's one problem I think there is there, and that's a real way to block people from talking about this and ever coming forward. These beings, they never would give me any revelations about the future, but they only gave me information concerning the earth and always the technologies, and there was a lot of love energy that came off them, enough to where being in the presence of a non-human, it would somewhat chill you out, because it's not just a normal thing, and there's a great risk of panic there, but the type of vibration coming off them, coming off their biofields, was very calming. It started off with a being that was insectoid, and when he would come and interact with me in my daily life, he was doing something with the optic nerves, I'm sure of that, to make him appear even more human. But when I saw him on board craft, he was definitely insectoid and ancient. Smaller, okay? That'd be the first being that stepped forward to me. There was another one step forward that was Mana, but it looks like Earth's brain coral is the way this being's head looked, okay? And taller, but very peaceful and also very scientific to a degree. I've also seen small blue beings that claim to be from Andromeda, maybe about 2.5 feet tall, I would say. Those are some. And then there's the other portion that I had a hard time dealing with, because there's no frame of reference for this, is that beings that are on board these crafts that are non-corporeal, non-physical. They have different containers for their consciousness, like plasma or light configurations of the inside of the crafts themselves that I've seen look like type of a fungus, a type of a hard mushroom that's slightly different. So that told me that these craft are actually organic. If we're going to become a type 1 civilization, we need to start just not incorporating the spiritual, but also the organic components into our space travel, definitely. I believe what is happening on the planet right now is a shift in consciousness. And meaning not, I've heard it called other things such as ascension. We're going to go to another dimension. I've heard all these things, but I think in reality, it's a shift of consciousness. Because at least in my opinion, 85 to 90% of our population has had extreme contact, but they can't remember it. They're unaware of it. Due to the fact our perception is so molded, internet has helped with starting communication amongst what I call melanin-dominant contactees, experiencers. And like I said, it was the indoctrination of religion that kind of stopped that to a degree. But right now, I think that the fact that certain people are coming forward and taking it through a few darts, is making it more accessible to others and others more comfortable about it. I believe they are reaching out because they're wanting right now to help us with this shift in consciousness. And what has been shown to me is humanity does have a type of free will, but we're not going to be allowed to destroy the earth anymore.
Yeah, my name is Robert Salas. I'm I had experience in the 60s at Malmstrom Air Force Base as a missile launch officer. When this incident happened, right afterwards, we were ordered to sign a non-disclosure statement. And that had very strict penalties if we broke that. The incident was classified. However, since it had been a long period of time, they were going to declassify what I'll call the Echo flight shutdown of 10 missiles. The Echo flight incident happened March 16th, 1967. Ours happened 8 days later, March 24th, 67. In addition to that, there have been many other incidents involving UFOs at nuclear missile sites. It happened again at Minot in 1968. It happened at Whiteman Air Force Base, and other bases, similar incidents. It took time to get to the point where I realized that we were certainly not alone in the universe. And I had plenty of time, of course, because I couldn't talk about it. But eventually I did get to that point, and it was a kind of awakening that what we were doing on Earth here, building up nuclear stockpiles, having the ability to completely destroy every living thing on the planet, was not acceptable, not only to us, but to others in the cosmos. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki still haunt me. I think about that a lot. And the fact that we could easily be involved in nuclear war today. We've done it with Chernobyl, we've done it with Fukushima. That's immoral. It's immoral to the whole human race. We can't just adopt the morals or ethics of one particular country or group of people. We're talking about humanity as a whole and how we fit in to the cosmos. You know, we are, it should be obvious to everyone by now that we are not alone. And it's ridiculous to think that we are. And the entities have spoken. They have said, you should not have nuclear weapons.
My name's Peter Maxwell Slattery, and I'm from Australia, and I'm a lifelong experiencer.